There are certain years in your life that, when you look back on them, feel different from all the others. And it's not necessarily because one huge thing happened, but because so many pieces of your life seem to start moving at the same time. For us, 2019 was one of those years. We got married, Edita became a United States citizen, our businesses continued growing and flourishing, and I started working on an idea that would eventually become something much bigger than I expected. At that time, though, none of it really felt like some sort of master plan coming together. So I don't want to create this beautiful picture that we had it all figured out and it was our plan coming together. Because at that time, we were still trying to figure things out. We were still working, and we were working a lot. We were still raising our family, and we were still trying to make good decisions with our money. And we certainly didn't even know what the next few years would bring for us. But now looking back, I think 2019 was a year we really started seeing the life we had talked about building begin to take shape. Welcome back to our Sweet Success. In the last episode, I talked about my first trip to Europe and how much that experience changed the way I thought about life. Before that trip, travel was something I always enjoyed. But after that trip, it became something more. It became part of the life Edita and I wanted to create together. Yes, we wanted businesses, we wanted financial stability, but we ultimately were looking to build a life that gave us freedom. So yes, do we want the things that most people want, wealth and things of that nature? Sure. But we understood that that takes time, and we trusted the process. What we didn't want to do is wake up in 20 or 30 years and realize that we had spent all of our time working and never actually enjoying the life that we were ultimately trying to build. That realization became important to us because in 2019, we made one of the biggest personal decisions of our lives. We decided to get married. And after researching over and over again, we finally landed on Sardinia, Italy. And by now, if you know anything about us, that probably does make sense. Travel had already started to become part of our story. And Edita is from Europe. So we love the idea of bringing our families and our lives together somewhere that truly felt meaningful to us. And we really sincerely weren't trying to prove anything to anyone. We didn't need a wedding that, was extravagant. We just wanted it to feel like us, which is family and travel. We wanted an experience that we would remember. And getting married in Sardinia became exactly that. When I look back on those pictures now, I don't immediately think about how much the wedding cost. I don't think about what we owed at that time. I just truly cherish and remember the memories of the people that were there, the food that we ate, the time that we had together. I remember becoming husband and wife. And I remember thinking that this was the life that both of us were trying to build. The life we both dreamed about. Not necessarily a life where every day feels like a vacation, because let's be honest, that's just not realistic. But a life where we had enough freedom to occasionally stop working, get on a plane, and experience something together that we would remember forever. That distinction became really important to us because, as ambitious as both of us were, we still are, neither of us wanted success to come at the expense of our family or our children. By this point, our definition of success was getting clearer. We wanted financial independence eventually. Yes, we wanted businesses that were successful. We wanted to make good investments. But those things were tools. They weren't the destination. The destination for us was freedom. Freedom to spend time with our children, freedom to travel, freedom to help the people we cared about the most. Freedom to make good choices based on what we believed was right for our family instead of always making decisions based on money. However, I want to be clear. Back then in 2019, we were nowhere near financial independence. But I think during that year, that's when we truly started to understand why we wanted it. That same year, though, Edita reached another huge milestone. She became a United States citizen. By then, she had already been living in the United States for many years even prior to us meeting. She had already built a career, and she had owned property, and now she was currently building her own private practice really living the American dream. So this was home. But becoming a citizen still represented something incredibly meaningful. I remember being really proud of her because, like most major accomplishments, you typically only see the final moments, right? You'll see things like the ceremony, maybe some videos, maybe even see some pictures, some of the certificates or whatever the paperwork that comes along with it to show that it was complete. But what most people don't see is all the years that led up to that moment. Moving from another country, I couldn't even wrap my head around that. Building a life after moving from another country, right? Then building a career, starting a family and raising a family. And on top of that all, going through the immigration process and continuing to move forward with the same motivation and enthusiasm every single day. That experience reminded me of something we would see again and again in our lives. Most accomplishments don't happen suddenly. They look sudden from the outside, but usually there are years of work behind them. And while all those personal things were happening, another big thing was happening. Our businesses were changing too. Our businesses were thriving. Our pest control company had come a long ways from where it was when Edita and I first met. At that time, I started hiring my first few employees, and I was learning real slowly, I should say. I was learning slowly how to become a business owner instead of simply being the person who did all the work. And those are two very different things. When you start a small business, you tend to wear every hat. I think my fellow entrepreneurs out there can relate to that. You typically sell, right? You answer the phone, you perform the actual service, you solve complaints, you collect money, you handle the emergencies. You basically become the entire company. So in the beginning, maybe that can work for you, but eventually you reach a point where the business can't really grow unless you change. And in that moment, that was that time. It was time for us to make that change. It was time for me to make that change. I had to learn that you have to trust people. You have to build systems. And probably the hardest of all, you have to accept that somebody else may not do it the exact same way you would do it, no matter how many times you train them and no matter how many times they demonstrate that they understand. That's just something that comes with it. That was something I was learning in real time. Around this same period, I also started working on an idea for a product. And this is one of those parts of our story that I really enjoyed looking back on because it wasn't some sort of grand business strategy. It started with seeing a problem and wondering whether there might be a better solution. And if there wasn't, wondering if I could create it. That's how a lot of business ideas begin. Not with someone sitting in a boardroom trying to invent the next big thing. Usually it's somebody doing the work every day and noticing something that could be improved, even if it's just a little bit. I had spent years in the pest control industry. I understood the industry. I understood the problems our customers dealt with day in and day out. And because I was actually in the field working on a regular basis, I could see opportunities that somebody outside the industry or outside the field probably wouldn't see or notice. One of those opportunities eventually became a product related to the cane toad problem that we have here in Florida. Now, I want to start by saying this wasn't some sort of like magical solution that I came up with overnight. It took time. Just like any business, it took time. And I didn't know how big the demand would be. And I definitely didn't know where it would eventually lead. I just thought we have an idea worth exploring. There's an interesting point in almost every business idea where you have to take a couple steps back and decide whether or not you're just going to keep talking about it or actually go out there and try to do it. And that's hard. Talking and doing is completely different. We hear this all the time. But the reality is, when it came time for me to begin executing, well, execution is where things became uncomfortable for me. Because once you start executing, it's no longer just talk, right? There's risk. There's time involved. There's money involved. There's the possibility that nobody wants what you created. That was actually a really big fear of mine. I was nervous that what if I go through all this headache and I think it's something worthwhile, but nobody wants it. There's also the possibility that people may think that the idea is ridiculous and just totally reject it altogether, and maybe even badmouth it. But I had already learned through the pest control industry that you don't always know what you're going to what's going to work until you actually try it, right? So dealing with pests, there's usually not one size fits all, right? So I kept moving forward with it, and little by little, that idea became something real, and then people actually started buying it. That moment was really hard to describe. If you've ever created something yourself, you understand what I'm talking about. The first time somebody pays money for something that existed only as an idea in your head a few days ago, it changes the way you think. Suddenly you realize that maybe this could actually become something. What that experience taught me wasn't simply how to create a product. It taught me to pay attention. Pay attention to opportunities. Opportunities are often hidden inside problems, and sometimes simple everyday problems that we see on a regular basis. And sometimes the best business ideas come from understanding a problem better than everybody else because you lived with it. You understand it. You're out there doing it. You're working in the field. That became a principle I carried with me from that point forward. Whenever there was any frustration in business, whenever customers kept asking the same question, whenever employees kept running into the same problem, I would stop and ask. I started asking, is there a better way to do this? Because sometimes the problem itself is showing you the opportunity. I know that sounds like super cliche, but it's true. Even though we were still building, there was something different now: momentum. I think momentum is one of the most underrated forces in life. When things are going badly, everything feels difficult. One problem creates another problem. Stress affects your decisions. Bad decisions create more stress, and it can feel like you're constantly trying to climb uphill. But with momentum, it can work in the opposite direction too. The same concept, right? One good decision creates another. You pay off debt, you free up money, you hire someone, you free up your time, right? You start a business, and that business, maybe that creates other opportunities. You solve one problem, and then once you solve that problem, it gives you confidence to solve another. However, none of these things individually changed our lives overnight, but together it was starting to move us somewhere different than we've ever been before. And this is the part that makes looking back so interesting for me. We had absolutely no idea where all of this was going. We had no idea where our lives were heading. We didn't know that my pest control business would grow dramatically. We didn't know that Edita's practice would eventually become more of a group practice rather than a solo practice. We didn't know that that product that I just got done creating would turn into something. We didn't know that we would eventually invest heavily. We didn't know that we would eventually sell one of our businesses or maybe multiple businesses. And we had definitely didn't know, we had no idea that we would eventually reach financial independence. We had, if you had shown us our future in 2019, I could probably sit here with extreme certainty that Edita agrees with me. We would never have believed you that our lives turned out to be the way that they did. We dreamt it, we wanted it to, but we had no idea that it would. We were simply trying to do a little better than what we did the year before. Each day better than the day before, right? When I think about 2019 now, the biggest lesson isn't really about marriage. It isn't about citizenship. It isn't about the product that I developed. And it isn't even about business. The lesson is that sometimes you spend years planting seeds before anything looks different. And then eventually, things start growing. And sometimes they start growing at the same time. That's why I think people give up too early. They make good decisions for 6 months and nothing dramatic happens. They start saving, they start investing, they start a business, they might start working out, they work on their marriage, they work on themselves. And because life doesn't immediately transform and there's no sort of instant gratification, they wonder whether any of it matters. And it does matter. You just may not be able to see it in the results quite yet. You have to give it time. By the end of 2019, we felt optimistic. Our family was growing together, our businesses were moving forward. We were learning a lot, personally and on a business level. We were traveling, we were making plans, and then 2020 arrived. None of us knew what was coming. Within a matter of months, COVID would disrupt businesses all over the world. Supply chains would become unpredictable. Everyday life would change, and we were about to face an entirely new set of challenges in our lives. But something interesting happened during that period too. Some of the lessons we had learned during that difficult year, or actually it was years leading up to it, were exactly the lessons that we were going to need to weather this storm. That's where we'll pick up in episode 6. If there's one thing I hope you take away from this episode, it's this. Don't underestimate the season you're in just because the results aren't obvious yet. Keep making good decisions, keep planting seeds, keep learning, keep building. You've got this. Because sometimes the life you're working towards is taking shape long before you can actually see it. Thank you again for joining me on this episode of Our Sweet Success. If you're enjoying Our Sweet Success, I'd love to have you subscribe and continue this journey with us. And before I go, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Was there ever a year in your life where you look back and you stopped and you realized that everything had started changing? Let me know below. I'll see you in episode 6.